check out a template here from Melaine, who worked on, okay, this is cool. So this is from David Allen, who's the author of the book Getting Things Done. Who also, I just listened to in a podcast interview with David Allen on one of my favorite podcasts, which I've mentioned at some place sometime before. It's called The Accidental Creative. So David Allen just came out with a 14th year, 2015 anniversary of the book Getting Things Done. Which, if you're into productivity, that's what this book is all about. But it's not just that interview is a good thing to listen to because it's kind of like productivity for creative folks too, because what it's all about is getting enough process and techniques in place so that anytime you sit down to take on a particular task, your mind isn't thinking about anything else. Every other task and thing that you have to do later that day or whatever, you have that stored in a particular place so that you can focus 100% on the thing you're working on, and really be able to get into that flow, the thing that I talk about within the mindset section. So David Allen is an interesting guy here, and it looks like Melaine used this kind of boxed modular template, which looks like it worked out pretty well. Cool. Notice the larger font, larger writing utensil, both for the title and then for the subtitles of each of these sections, and icons at the beginning of each, and then kind of more bulleted lists, but also the ability to kind of add in sketches wherever it feels appropriate. So this is cool. I like this as an example of a structure on the page that helps you decide where to put ideas. But then within that structure, there's still a whole lot of flexibility with how you get ideas down. This is very cool. And then here are some other more abstract potential layout diagrams that Melaine shared. So you can see some kind of more organic from the middle out approach. And then it kind of looks like this particular example was a little bit of a combination of this one here with kind of the calm approach, but also the kind of singular big ideas at the top. And you can imagine different ways of kind of using these to show hierarchy, and this looks good. And that's a nice, we can contrast that to Melaine's more organic approach. This from an interview on the Unmistakable Creative, another good podcast that I also listened to. There was one week where they had on both Dave Gray, who is the co-author of Gamestorming, which could arguably be a book in our library. It's really similar. A lot of the things, techniques, processes that Sunny Brown mentions in her book, The Doodle Revolution, there's a lot of overlap between Gamestorming and the Doodle Revolution. And I thought the Doodle Revolution was a little bit bigger picture, or was more applicable to us as visual note takers. But Gamestorming is also a really good book. Dave Gray, I think, has a couple of other good books out there. So in this case, you can see how you can notice the more organic approach, one that there aren't these thick lines on the page beforehand, and how Melaine filled the page, and then also kind of went in after the fact and added some color, which is a cool way to use color. We haven't talked about that within the course yet, but we're seeing some good examples across the board here of ways to add color to your sketches to make certain things pop. What I'd be curious to hear from Melaine about, if you're willing, Melaine, if you'd be willing to expand. You touched a little bit on this in your forum post, but what you felt about having structure like this on the page compared to having the little bit more of an organic approach to taking your notes. Melaine, would you be willing to expand on that, or talk a little bit about your experience with a structured approach compared to an organic approach. Awesome. Melaine, you are unmuted, but it looks like you still need to. Oh, there you go. How's it going, Melaine?
Hi, Doug. How are you?
I am good. I am good. Yeah, so would you be
Yes.
willing to talk a little bit about each of these styles and what you found more useful?
Well, I've used both the styles. I've used the more structured approach, and I've also used the organic approach quite a bit. With the structure, I've felt that it kind of gives you those kind of constraints which where you're forced to listen to specific ideas, and given those constraints, you're forced to just put those ideas down that are really, really relevant and the ones that you really want to put down on the page. So my biggest fear about using the structured approach is that sometimes I feel that I might run out of writing space or
Mm-hmm.
drawing space on the page. But having said that, I still like the structured approach because of the constraints and the fact that it forces you to sort of focus on what is it that you want to get out of that session, be it a podcast or a book you're reading or a webinar or so on and so forth. Um, I I kind of have a preference to the organic approach because I think I'm a very free form kind of a person. So I like to have a lot of white space. I like to draw and write, and I like having that kind of flexibility, I would say. So yeah, so I've tested both. I like both, but I think the organic approach works better for me because I don't know. I just feel that I can tweak and adjust and modify my own constraints within the page while I'm listening to a session or I'm reading something. So yeah, that's my take on both the approaches.
That's great. Do you by chance remember, Melaine, for this particular sketch note of the Dave Gray interview, how the elements, the order in which these elements came together, um, in terms of like how this Dave's journey, if this journey came all at once, or if this came throughout the interview, and then um, just because there's a nice unity and fit and flow to everything. And I'm curious kind of the order in which these pieces came in as you were listening to them and the order in which you kind of put them on the page. Do you happen to remember what that was like for you in this case?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favorite notes, and also one of my favorite podcasts by Dave. So when I was listening to this podcast, what I usually do is I always look for when a speaker speaks, he usually tells you what he's going to speak about. So the first thing that he said that he was going to talk about his journey. So in my mind, I already knew that I had to set some space out to note down Dave's journey, and hence I left that little space on the top to kind of map out his journey. So it kind of came as the talk went along. So once the journey part was done, he started talking about how schools kill creativity. So I kind of put all those things on the extreme left side of the page, and then I kind of did like a radial thing around show your work. Dave said a couple of things about everybody can draw and show your work and accept criticism and things like that. So it was basically free form, but I the notes evolved as the talk went on. So I put all the images and the text in, and then I filled in the borders and the colors and all those came later.
Hmm.
So that's basically how I structured the page.
Hmm. So then all these kind of bordering lines and this kind of separation of the fact about schools and creativity, those all came, as well as the color. Obviously, that all came after the podcast interview was over, or at least after all the main content of the notes were down.
Yeah, that's right. Some of it I was able to fit in as the talk went on. So I was able to do a couple of borders and constraints and maybe even throw in one or two colors. But I did major part of the constraints and the coloring right after the podcast was done. I just feel that that is something that you can always add on later. The important thing is that you get those ideas down first. So I either do the image and the text first, or I do the text and then fill in the images later, and then I do the colors and the constraints right at the end.
And was it a pretty quick process at the end to add in the borders and the color? Do you remember in this case, like approximately how many minutes you spent doing that kind of follow-up work?
I don't think it took me longer than, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
At the max.
That's good. Yeah, because I think there is this, it can be hard if you plan to do some things after the fact, if there's any sort of like big break in between you taking the notes, the things you do in real time, and then doing stuff after the fact, if there's kind of a break in between those two, or if you can see that it's going to take too much time to do that after the fact work, then it makes it much less likely that you'll do anything as a follow-up. So I like this and kind of the story behind these notes, because I think sounds like you hit kind of the sweet spot of doing enough of this, adding borders and color after the fact that is not daunting in a way that some other sort of more involved follow-up process could seem daunting. So that's a good. I'm glad like we have that example here, because that question of work that you do, note taking in the moment, and what you do after the fact. I'm curious how people approach that. So I think this is a cool example for folks to see. So thank you for sharing that. Anything else? You'd like to share about these notes or layout or anything else that has come up so far?
Yeah, there's just one more thing that just a suggestion for other people is that if you're using color in your notes, what has helped me is that I constrain the colors to maybe 1 or 2 or maximum 3. I try not to go to more than three colors. Because the more variety of colors you have, the longer you spend on the notes. And if it's going to be a quick process, then sometimes it helps to just have 1 or 2 colors, to sort of play around with post the note-taking session. So yeah.
I like that. That's a good idea. I mean, I had thought of kind of limitations on color or on fonts. We've talked about this some before, that while you're taking notes, it helps you make quick decisions in the moment. But I hadn't really thought of also reducing the amount of after the fact work. That reducing the number of colors, like you said, is a good way to make sure you don't spend too much time on it. So that's a really good point, and something that I will probably include in the next module on color coming up here in a week. So thank you for that, Melaine.
Thank you, Doug.
All right. Cool. Wow, this hour is going by fast. Okay, a few more examples here. These from Tournevis. Couple distinct applications in contrasting applications that I thought were real interesting. So these notes from Tournevis came from a course that she took a while back on, I think the course was on mind mapping and data visualization. So it's interesting taking visual notes in a data visualization and mind mapping class. What you can see here, this is a Moleskine notebook. I might be saying that word wrong. That you can see it has these light boxes just on the, whoops, didn't want to do that. Just on the outer portions of these pages, but then this blank space in the middle. And I think her intent going in was to have images, have those boxes be for images, and then the space here to be for words. But you can see that there's a lot of freeform there, and there's that some cases where the opposite, where she'll have some text in these boxes and images here. And what seeing both this type of notebook and these notes made me think that one way to potentially improve the templates that I've been making, all the ones that I've showed, if I have like boxes on a page or I'm dividing the page in some way, the lines that do that dividing, for me, they've always been these like black, dark lines that are kind of solid and would look weird if you drew outside of them or do something that was kind of overlapping. What I like about this notebook here is that these lines here, they're faint. So, they're almost like suggested constraints to your layout. But obviously there's no problem if you cross that border. So that's making me think that if I'm going to use a structured approach where I do have some lines on the page to help me determine layout, probably it wouldn't be a bad idea to make those lines on the page a much grayer, a light gray, to give the freedom of moving outside of those if I need or want to. So even that in and of itself, as we think about the spectrum from structure to organic, it's not only just about having lines on the page, it might also be how thick or dark those lines are. So that's another potentially fun thing to try out, to experiment with. A second example, I think this one was from a while back. This was real recent. So Turnavis is a university professor, and this was one long image. I only broke it up to make it fit on this slide a little bit more easily. This was some notes, freeform, totally organic. I think in their class they were discussing comparing the real world that we live in to the world of the novel, the book that they were studying. And these were her notes as part of that discussion. And I can't really remember if this was part lecture, part discussion, probably some of each, but I feel like it was mostly on the discussion side. So you can see how this would be a really cool instructional tool for an educator, for a teacher to use mid-conversation with the class. And probably most, we all have examples of being in class where the notes being taken or shared were boring. Maybe ones that kind of look like this, that are just PowerPoint slides that have a way too much text on them. Those will get better over time. To having something more like this as an anchor to your conversation that you're having with your class. So that was a cool example as well.